There we go. So welcome to TSQA 2022. The Wild Wild Test is our theme. I've got this shared because we are actively seeking out sponsors for our 2022 conference. I know we've all been trying to get together in person. When we sat together and thought about it, we were going to be asking people to travel, have their companies pay for travel, and then be in a space and then have someone ask for like, you have to wear a mask in this space. And we just felt like, given all the dynamics, we're going to stay remote. The upside to being remote is that we can be like this. We've had a lot of success with our meetup being in online. And so you can join the content. We're going to make the tickets dirt cheap because we know that your time is valuable and this is enough to keep and support our critical mission of getting better at our jobs or getting better jobs, whichever comes first. So we are looking for board members for 2022 and beyond. If you have time to spare in the next quarter and you would like to help out in organizing, getting sponsors, or talking with volunteers, anything in the middle, we need extra hands in organizing this event in this new way. So please reach out to me, info@tsqa.org, and we will get you some job. Let's see what else. Am I forgetting anything, Jenny?
I am looking at the notes that you sent me that you were going to talk about. Oh, CFP. So our CFP technically ended, but since we're talking about a kind of venue shift here, we are keeping it open for a little bit longer, especially for my TSQA buddies. So you can still submit. You can also email me directly, jenny.bramble@gmail.com, if you've got a talk or if you want to put a talk in, but you don't feel like you've got it together. I can help you get it together. That's something I'm pretty good at, I think.
Yes, indeed. She'll also give you all kind of encouragement for doing it. And we do pay our speakers for the conference.
We do.
So that's an additional motivation for that. All right. So tonight we have Jenny Bramble stepping in for Amanda. Jenny, let's see. Let me see if I can recount all the ways that Jenny's been fantastic. Jenny's been working with the TSQA board for almost 4 years. Maybe 3. She helps us a lot with getting speakers together. She comes from Willow Tree, where she championed every kind of user strategy for getting better quality products out there in the field.
Actually, Papa now. I switched jobs.
I know. And is now the director of quality, Fancy Pants. And so we're going to talk about the soft skills of automation. And Jenny, it is all yours.
Thank you, my dear. So I want to set a couple of expectations for this before I get started. This is about a 4-hour workshop. So we're not going to be here for 4 hours. Don't worry. You can go home to your families at some point. So what I'm going to do is, the last time I gave this, there were a couple points that were, we'll say, contentious. And people are like, wow, I disagree with that. So I'm going to present those pieces in particular. And I would love for some kind of feedback. I'd love to hear, hey, this is spot on the money, or wow, I disagree with your entire life philosophy. Also, that's fine. Yeah, so I'm going to do that. We're going to kind of go through some of this. Feel free to engage with chat, to unmute yourself and babble right on back at me if you've got a question or a comment. I would love to have part of that. I'd love that to be part of this. Excuse me. Whew. I'm sorry. I've been in meetings for like 12 hours today, so I'm a little loopy. Plus, this is not my first glass of wine. Hydration. All right, kids, let's get this going. All right, you should see an incredibly pretty set of slides that says soft skills of automation. Give me just a second to get my chat and everything up. Oh, no, here's that. There we go. All right, fantastic. I have chat up. I have slides up. I think it is absolutely 100% time to party. If y'all didn't come for a party, I am sorry. I don't know what you were expecting. So we're going to talk about the soft skills of automation today. As Susan said, my name is Jenny Bramble. I'm the Director of Quality Engineering at a company called Papa. We promote healthier living through human connection. And that can look like a lot of things, primarily people coming to your house, coming to the houses of seniors and hanging out with them. Because loneliness is a really huge part of why people end up leaving their homes and going into nursing homes and that sort of thing. So by having someone there that can be a companion on a temporary basis, we can help alleviate some of that. We'll also walk your dog, clean your house, help you with your medications, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really super cool sort of thing. We're going to talk about a few things today. There's a lot more things on this slide that we're going to talk about, so we'll see how far we get. A couple of things here I do want to talk about are the human machine work scale and the code awareness scale, because those two are a little bit, like I said, there were some disagreements with me on those, and that was super fun. I love to be disagreed with. I think that is how we foster better communication and bring in different viewpoints to where we are. So please disagree with me if you disagree with me. Please agree with me if you agree with me. And then what I also want to do is try and hit the soft skills of automation. And I believe there are 3 of these. Can this be automated? Should this be automated? And how do we actually go about automating this? The first 2 are the most vital. And this is what I mean when I say automation starts before your hands hit your keyboard. There is so much thinking, there's so much mindset, there's so much like good, juicy brain work and time that happens before you even start to code that is incredibly important. And if you work in a company where you don't have time for automation, you still have time to think because that's literally your job. So you can actually start developing this mindset and developing these soft skills, even if you don't have time for automation. So I want to start by saying I've been many things. I want to make it clear where I'm coming from. I never set out to be a developer. I never wanted to write code. I went to NC State University and it killed my love of coding, like killed it dead. I started looking for jobs where I could be in computers, but did not have to code. It was that bad, y'all. So when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to someone that had to refine her love for, or her affection, we'll say, for coding in order to move forward with automation. So I'm not one of those people that's like, yeah, let's code all the things, because that's just not who I was. And that's not where I'm coming from. It's a required skill to move forward into the future, I believe. And I think that now that I've got a better view on it, I'm a better tester. So I've been many things: a mushroom seller, a tester, a speaker, a goth, a manager, a troublemaker, not a developer. And if you don't believe that I sell mushrooms, come to the Durham Farmers Market once in a while and I will legitimately be there selling mushrooms. Not every weekend, but a lot of them. So this is the experience I want to bring to the workshop today, is not someone who came in as a coder to do coding, to make code, but I see that. But someone who came in as a tester that wanted to become someone that had more testing, more coding experience. All right, part 1, automation is, I'm gonna skip this part, skip that part. A couple of things that I want to point out about being a manual tester who wants to move into automation is that we should always respect that. I think that manual testing is what automation is built on. I don't think you can be a strong automation engineer without being a very strong manual tester. The 2 are intrinsically linked. And I want to remind everyone that you know so much. As a manual tester, you know so much about how people move through things, how code works even, how humans work. And this is incredibly vital because everything in your career has led you to this moment. It doesn't matter if you're a tester, a project manager, a manager, a developer, an automation engineer. Everything you have ever done has led you here. Everything you've ever done has made you who you are. And these skills are valuable and important as you move into picking up automation skills. You never drop a skill set for another skill set. They always augment each other. We're going to skip this part too. Just feel free to drop it in chat if you'd like to answer some of these questions, and someone just ask, can I really do the bridge? I can totally do the bridge. Like, I do it all the time. There's several pictures from TSQA. We're gonna skip some of these questions. If you want to answer these in chat, feel free. I love it when that happens. Okay, here's how I define automation. Automation is testing in which machines do most of the work. I might set it in motion, I might flip the dominoes, but the machines are doing most of the work when automation is happening. We're not going to talk about that time that I wrote a test that had a wait statement in the middle so I could tap a system pop up, because that was embarrassing for everyone involved.
I would
Some
say
of the
that it
types of
doesn't do
automation.
most of the work. I would actually challenge that. I would challenge that most of the work is not the word, right? Because there's a lot of work that goes into testing it for its first release. Doing most of the work means it takes away too much from the actual effort of testing. I think it's more nuanced. The dumb work, does the light work? Does the dumb light work faster?
The mundane.
Yes.
The mundane.
The repetitive, the actual executing, run it over and over and over.
Yeah.
So I like to think of it, so think of a specific example. Like, let's think about logging in. When I do the manual logging in, I have to type the username, I have to type the password, I have to press the button. If I've written an automated test to do that, then the computer is typing the password, they're typing the username, they're pressing the button. And when I say, excuse me, automation is the concept of making manual repetitive tasks with software. I love that, Stephen. So when I say machines do most of the work, what I mean is once it's set up, once it is ready to go, then the machines take over. Like, every time I tell it to run the test, all I have to do is say, go forth, my precious, and do the thing. And it does it without my intervention. Does that clarify at all? Or do you still want to give nuance? Okay, cool. Nuance is a great phrase, because a lot of times it's not something that's wrong. It's something that doesn't feel quite right. So if you want to argue the nuance of something, heck yes, lay it on me. Thank you, Susan. So I've listed here a couple of things that I believe are automation. UI tests, unit tests, integration tests, security scans, I believe are a form of automated testing. Low code or no code tools, scripts, anything where you're really starting to engage. Oh, Andre says, I'd say machines do test execution, which I really like that. That's a good one. I'm also reading chat as we're doing this. So if you're watching this later, apologies if this is coming off a little bit like a rabbit bouncing around. I still love you. The thing I want to point out, and this is where Susan's mention of nuance comes in, is that this is a spectrum. I don't think automation is a binary. I don't think you either do automation or manual. I think there's a spectrum between the two, where you do more manual or more automation, depending on what phase of your career you're in, what phase of testing you're in, and what type of testing you're doing. I call this the human machine work scale because I love giving things goofy names. So human machine work scale is what I think about when I think about automation. And it looks like this to me. So you've got humans do most of the work at one end and machines do most of the work at the other end. Between the two, there is a spectrum of different things. The joke I like to make is much like gender, it's a spectrum. So here's what it looks like when you start filling these things in. Manual testing, humans are doing most of the work. Exploratory testing, again, it's primarily human driven. But when we start to get into things like load testing or penetration tests, unit tests, CI/CD is like the ultimate machines are doing everything moment to me. It's not technically testing, but it felt like the ultimate machines do all the work. So this is what I think about when I think about automation. I think, okay, where on this scale does it lie? How human driven is it versus how machine driven is it? Who is doing the primary amounts of work whenever we're talking about these things? Does anyone have any comments on that one? Because this was a particularly, this is where people were asking for more nuance when I was first presenting this. the other thing about this is that it's not just about testing, it's about humans. As testers, we fall somewhere on this scale. We either gravitate towards tests where we do most of the work or where computers do most of the work. And I know there's a few of us in here who do a lot with generating data for tests and running automation and doing those sorts of things. And you'd be farther down towards the machines do most of the work. Me personally, I'm a very touchy-feely emotions and colors kind of girl. So I'm definitely pretty far on humans do most of the work side. That's where I'm most comfortable. But as I've grown in my career, I've recognized that I need to be able to stretch to both ends of this scale. And that's what the soft skills of automation are really about. Because the future sees us moving towards more machine-assisted testing. If you've been to a bunch of my talks, this is something that I will hammer in constantly. The software industry is fast. We are moving constantly. We are never going to be asked to move slower. We are always going to be asked for more, for more, for more. Part of this is capitalism. Part of this is just the nature of humans wanting to be more things. And the more machine-assisted testing we can do, the farther we can move down the human-machine work scale, the more space we're going to have for the fun parts of our jobs, the thinking parts of our jobs, the parts that really start to engage our brain, and the faster we can move at scale with less risk. And I think that the future has us moving faster, and it has us either burning ourselves out or learning to get computers to help us. So that's my big spiel on that one, y'all. I will talk about that forever, but we'll try not to. The next concept I want to bring up is the code awareness scale. We say black box and white box testing a lot. And I think that's great. But again, we are starting to talk about a binary there. We talk about gray box testing, but then we're talking about three things and not like it. Again, we're talking about a spectrum. This is not something that's either white box or black box. You can have any kind of code awareness between the two. So code awareness speaks to how much you or your code you or your testing knows about the underlying code of your application or your use case or your feature. Some types of testing naturally are more code aware, some are naturally less. Do I have an example? Yeah, I have an example. So here's what this looks like to me. We've got no knowledge of code on one side and full knowledge of code on the other side. And the anchors to these look like this for me. Unit tests have essentially full knowledge of code because they are testing discrete little units of code, and they have full knowledge about what they're doing. They can interact with all the different parts of the code. And when we're doing black box testing, when we're doing like pure manual, gushy, brainy manual testing, at that point, we are talking about no knowledge of code. We come into this with no knowledge of code. User acceptance testing also falls down that area as well. I have like 3 slides that are the same thing, and I don't know why. Sorry about that. So here I've filled it out again. We're talking API tests being kind of at the farther end. UI tests are a little bit towards the middle because they don't necessarily have full knowledge of code. They can interact with the pieces that are exposed in the application and the GUI that's presented to you. I put testing refactors right in the middle because I've had to friggin' test refactors like 4 times in the past couple of months. And if you don't have an idea of what was refactored and how it can potentially affect the rest of the code, then you don't really have a good idea of what you should test. I've got accessibility a little bit closer to no knowledge of code, but you still need some knowledge because screen readers are screen readers.
Is that why? Because you have to link the text to a region? Is that why you put it in that spot? Because I would have called Gherkin more code aware than accessibility.
I think it could really go either way. I put accessibility a little bit higher because you do need to understand like how tabbing works or what the regions are and that kind of stuff. And with Gherkin and Cucumber, they're kind of designed for anyone can write it. So it's a little bit, yeah, exactly. So it can actually move anywhere on the scale depending on what kind of Gherkin and Cucumber you're writing. It's fun, right?
On the testing and refactors, are you trying to say that you need to add more tests because you're trying to target those refactored areas?
I need to know what a refactor does. So recently we did a refactor to make sure that the back button works on a particular page. Okay, then what do I need to test? The back button on this page? Cool. Unfortunately, what they didn't say was it also affected all the back buttons in the entire app. If I'd known that, if I'd had that awareness, then I would, yeah, what would the back button refactor have touched? If I'm told that it's just one little piece, then I don't need to be as code aware. Then that's the code aware. By being more aware of the code that was touched, I can do better testing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, anytime I hear the word refactor, I actually just make sure that I'm added to their code review. It's no longer a black box. Definitely no longer a black box to me.
And that's actually, that's part of a senior mindset as you're moving through like the levels of being a tester. When you're a junior and someone's like, I refactored, you're like, cool, I'm gonna test everything. And then as you become more mid-level, you start to get that nuance. Apparently, I'm just gonna say nuance all night, y'all. But you start to understand the nuance of what are we testing when we test a refactor? Like how much code awareness do I need? And then when you start to move into senior, you're teaching other people what you need to look at whenever you are running up against something like that. So yeah, I do the same thing. As soon as someone's like, I refactored, I'm like, cool, I'm gonna read that. Package upgrades also come into this. Like we recently upgraded the authentication package on one of our systems, and I sat down with the developer. I'm like, what does this affect? Is it one of those things where if I can log in and log out, it's good? Or do I need to test timeout? Do I need to test bad things? Do I need to test all these other different systems? And we were able to sit down and come up with a test plan that was really super efficient because I had better knowledge of the code that was being changed. Any other comments on the code awareness?
Yeah, I have a comment. So I would move actually testing refactor all the way to the right, because a refactor it implies that you already know your repo, you know packages, you know everything, you know where are moving pieces. And as for UI tests, you can do the work. I know without knowing the whole code base. Just you can do that any, like let's say mid-level automation engineer can do the UI testing just for a particular task in the particular area without touching global things.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, and I think those are, I think kind of depending on where you are in your life and what you're exactly doing, you'll put things in different places. And that's also something really valuable to think about. Like, where am I right now? Or where's this test right now?
What you said earlier about being a junior and senior level. So some people say this is a no-op, the test refactor. Some people would say, oh, if it's a refactor of existing code and there was no feature changes, then literally it is just rerun all of my tests. That's it. So this could be, depending on the scope of test, as you said, black box testing, it's end-to-end testing, or refactor could be functional testing or something like that. And it depends on, you know, at what level are you responsible for testing? Like in some more organizations like mine, I'm only end-to-end testing. But if I'm in said dev in a different company, my responsibility is integrations and end-to-end testing. So I kind of agree with that individual. It could be all the way to the right, depending on which company you are, or literally it could be all the way to the left.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, again, it's a very personal kind of thing. Like, these are examples from essentially my life. And everyone is going to have a different take on it because we all operate a little bit differently. So I really, really honestly appreciate this. Yeah. The next piece of this is, where are you? Because humans also have a code awareness. Some people have full knowledge of code. Like, I recently tested something and I'm like, hey, this isn't showing up, but the code says it should be. And someone else was like, what were you doing in my repo? I live here. But then there's other people that have no knowledge of code. They don't really have much of a desire to do testing that is incredibly code aware. I think that is not helpful for the future, because I think at some point you do need to step back and have awareness of the code and know what it's doing so that you can be a more thoughtful, introspective kind of tester. And the more comfortable we are with the code, the better prepared we are to test it. Even if you're not a developer, hey, shout out to Jenny. Being able to read it is important. Being able to have a conversation about coding is important. Being able to just understanding control statements. I was writing an automation test and I was getting the absolute wrongest possible answer for my searches were not doing what I expected them to. So I was able to dive into the code and be like, oh, right, the developer has not handled this case. Well, if he's not going to handle it, I'm not going to handle it either. Not a helpful attitude, but I was in a bad mood. So the more comfortable we are with the code, the better prepared we are to test it. I don't think we always need 100% visibility into the code or 100%. We don't need to be developers to be good testers, but by having more comfortableness with the code, we can be better testers. Is my point.
Sometimes not knowing the code, in some cases, is even more essential, because you're acting more like the end user, where you intended the product to do X, Y, and Z when you did it. It's kind of like the difference between verification and validation. And like, okay, you said that this application can do X, Y, and Z, but when I'm looking at it through the UX, or even if you're using REST API, whatever, I want to do this because it looks like it should be like this. It's kind of like the difference between someone that knows the one specific area of the function, and while the end customer has a little bit more knowledge of like the whole expected workflow. And that person that only worked at that little function didn't think of all the different other inputs or all the other different possibilities, and then they missed all those tests, or it's just it escaped the requirements or something like that. So it's a give or take depending on what type of code, what your application is, or as you said, it's a mindset. It's how you feel. Actually, this emotion thing that you brought up is a good point.
I think that's incredibly valuable. As testers, one of the skills that I have as a tester that I find very, very valuable is being able to step into the mindset of other people. Being able to say, how would Otis, the 98-year-old man who hates technology, use this application? How would Maria, who is visually impaired, use this application? How would Rachel, who is in college and super tech savvy, how would she use it? Yes, user personas are really important, and being able to step into that persona is important. So like Steven said, being able to step back from your knowledge of the code is really, really important. Empathy, the imagine yourself as this user is very important. One of my testers calls it empathetic testing, and I love that so much. Aaron and I gave a talk on empathy is the foundation of testing. So like I said, I'm incredibly emotion and human driven, which is kind of hilarious to anyone that knows me.
Actually,
Good conversation, y'all. Thank you.
going back to your just talked about the user personas. A lot of developers are like, oh, we'll deal with that later. I'm like, yeah, but if that, you might be causing so much rework if you wait so long. That's what that. It's one of the things, like we help dev, or we help product owners figure out, like, hey, we got to shift this left to do this work now, because it's going to be, it's like the ROI of leaving it to the end is it's going to cost more. So yeah, thanks.
Preach. Absolutely. Love that. I believe this is getting a little off topic, but that's what we're doing tonight. While we have our users' attention, while they're in our app, while they're using our things, while they're in our systems, we have an ethical responsibility to do as little harm as possible. Like it's the leave no trace philosophy, but for humans. We want to make their lives better, and we don't want to hurt them. And I think that by having empathy and by considering user personas, by doing these things early, we are fulfilling our ethical responsibility to making non-harmful software. So there you go. That's your test philosophy from Jenny moment. She says, like, there's only going to be one of them.
What you just said is a whole topic on its own.
I've been trying to get that talk accepted to conferences, and no one's bit yet, so I might do it for TSQA. I know the organizer.
Isn't that what Facebook deals with every single day?
It is. It is. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't review conference proposals. People might shy away from Facebook, but they should certainly be interested if you say Boeing and Volkswagen for ethics.
Or Zoom and Teams, Google Hangout, like all of these things that we use constantly. Are they good experiences? Do they leave us better than we were before? And if you've got big groups of people, especially someone that's auditorially, someone who doesn't hear so super great, Zoom is better for them generally than Teams or Google Hangout, because it does better with captions, like the on the fly kind of caption stuff. So is that harmful? Is that something we should think about? Yes, use Zoom. Sorry, I'm not a Zoom shill, I promise. But it does have, in this one particular way, it's got some things that are really awesome. All right, let's move on from this for a moment, because there's a couple other things that I would really like to cover before the end of the night. And I do want to let everybody go at a decent time. Yeah, Zoom also doesn't choke when you have more than one video streaming. This is important for people like me who are still basically on dial-up. Okay, I have a couple of things here. Moving towards being more code. Wait, that's not the slide I thought that was.
You shouldn't mention dial-up.
So moving towards being more code aware. If you're not super code aware, if you're very far on the not code aware side of the scale, then you may want to move towards being more code aware. I've got a couple of suggestions for doing that. Learn to read code. You don't necessarily need to learn to code, but being able to at least read it, understand control statements, understand kind of programming theory, that's going to go a long ways to helping you be more code aware. Learning the software development lifecycle at your company outside of what test does, also very important. I strongly believe that automation should follow the software development lifecycle of a company, because automation code is production code. End of story. I will beat that drum forever. Learn Git, learn your versioning system. There is someone at your company who is really, really good with Git. Find them, bake them cookies, be their friend. Because at some point you're going to have a merge conflict and you're going to think, maybe I should just quit my job instead of dealing with this. So you're gonna want to help with that, and that person is going to be your guide. Get deep into your logs and analytics. Analytics are one of the most important pieces for testers. Spoiler alert, Amanda's talk, hopefully in November, it's going to be all about analytics and how we can use them to make ourselves better testers. Get deep into this. Logs are sometimes hard to read. They can be annoying and frustrating. You can make them better by getting into them and saying, here's what I use them for. Let's talk about making this better. They will give you so much information about what people are doing. And then review unit tests. I realize that I talk a lot about unit tests in this talk because I really like them, and they have opened up a world of hilarity for me, because unit tests will tell you how developers think. They will give you it is a step-by-step guide to how your developers think, and they're amazing. And they're generally pretty easy to read because they're small snippets of code. They should be very short. They should have descriptive titles. If they don't, hey, time to put some comments on that PR. And they'll, like I said, it's a just direct line into how your developers think, and can really help you to be more code aware and to get to a place where you understand what's going on or what they think is going on. It can also tell you where the gaps in their knowledge are and where you should be testing more strongly. Every developer has a signature. They code in a particular style. They write a particular type of code, and that generally leads to a particular type of defect. So as you learn their style, you will learn to test better for that particular developer. Not that I use that all the time. Occasionally, one of my developers actually asked me when he saw this talk, he's like, what bugs do I write? And I'm like, I have reported every single one of them to you. It's not my fault that you're not listening. Sorry, my friend. If you are already deeply code aware, if you feel like you're already very deep on that side of the scale, then you should work on skills that are less code aware. And Stephen brought some of this up in the idea of stepping back from the code and being able to do black box testing. So here's a couple of tips for doing that. Practice strict exploratory testing, like with charters and everything. Like absolutely by the book exploratory testing. You will learn so much about your testing style and about the application if you do this. If you're not familiar with exploratory testing, we had a fantastic talk from Marit a couple of months ago, and she talked about exploratory testing for pipelines. She's one of the foremost authorities on exploratory testing. Find her stuff, get into it, and do like really deliciously strict exploratory testing. It's so good, y'all. Run a bug bash. Like get a bunch of people that have never used your app together and put them in a room with your app and some donuts and see what happens. That's going to teach you a lot about how people who are not code aware work and how people move through your application. Review manual test cases. A lot of companies will write their test. A lot of testers write their test cases. Review those just like you would review someone's code. Are they looking for the right things? Do the test cases make sense? Is there data missing, et cetera, et cetera? And that's going to also bring you out of the code awareness and into kind of the more procedural testing awareness. Get involved in UAT or accessibility testing. Accessibility testing is slightly more code aware than other types of testing, but it will help you develop empathy, and it will help you develop a different user persona that you can step into. Oh, Steven says, I always ask managers to allow manual testers a few hours each week for exploratory testing. Whoop, whoop. Love that. It's so good. And finally, teach someone else to use your app or your feature or your use case or whatever you're doing. Actually sitting down and teaching someone else how to use something brings you deeply, deeply out of the code aware space, because you're not talking about code, you're talking about user actions. And it starts to detach the code that makes the things from the user behavior that we see. Susan says, I don't know why we put that button there, but whatever. We've had a couple of moments like that this week.
I kind of want to talk about the last point. Teach someone else to use the app. So I don't agree with that. new user experiences should be, the app should be self-explanatory. If your user experience isn't self-explanatory, I would, or I would say maybe it depends on the application, but if
Depends
you
on the
can't,
application,
yeah, if you can't get it to be like self-explanatory, I'm saying that there's something wrong.
Well, and I think that's why she has the charters there, right? I don't know if you've done Jenny's charters, but that's exactly her counterpoint on that. It's if you don't have the opportunity just to work in that space where you're testing from a charter, in lieu of that, just showing someone how to use it, you're like, suddenly you say things. And my joke was, I don't know why we put that button there, but like, how many times have you said that when talking through your application with somebody else, where you're like, I don't know why it looks like this or why we put it here, but here it is. And then that should be your pause moment where you go, oh, that's bad design. That sucks. I should write a bug ticket for that, you know?
Or the other amusing approach from your standpoint is if you think your app is so user-friendly, give it to a user and tell them to use it and don't tell them anything. Just stand over their shoulder and watch them.
Sometimes I do that.
That can really give you some interesting insights into not only your own application, but users as well. So
Yeah. You expect them to have some knowledge of what what we're working on, but
well, yeah.
sometimes I even let my child play.
Good, love that. So when I was at Willow Tree, I actually worked with a lot of designers and UX people who were very, very precise. Like you said, Stephen, if your app isn't self-explanatory, if your app doesn't have a story, if people don't know where to go next in this choose your own adventure of the application, then you're not doing a good job of developing it. It turns out developers are terrible UX designers.
Amen.
Sorry, team. So if you don't have someone who specializes in UX or who specializes in design, and you're just trying to bash something together, you're going to get a usable app, but not a usable app. And I think that's where this kind of teach someone else to use it moment can be helpful. If your app is already usable to the point where it can just be used, hell yeah, that is amazing. But I would argue that most apps are not there. Like I just downloaded Tetris. That's not a very usable app, honestly. I just want to make the little blocks come down. And it was difficult to actually find like where the game was.
Well, even for us, I mean, that's why it's important to have a UX expert to some extent. But even for us, we forget sometimes that we've been sitting in front of this application for days, months, years, whatever. You know, whereas our new user has not, or maybe they at least haven't seen this new functionality that we've been working on for several releases. So
100%. Esther, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I've worked at two places that had like marketing information applications, and perhaps if you are a professional marketer who knows about all their little acronyms about statistics and numbers, you could use that software with no training, but I couldn't because I didn't know what conversions were or counting clicks or any of that stuff.
I feel like you're talking about a mutual past job.
Yeah, but then I worked
had the same experience.
Yeah, I worked at another place that had, and like before that job where I worked with Jenny, I had never heard of marketing campaign. So, but yeah, I mean, an actual marketing person would have had a better time diving in with no guidance than I did.
I want to add to user-friendly topics. So, and yeah, I am probably in the worst situation because we are working with senior living communities, and we thought that we created the simplest app ever. with huge text, huge buttons, and nothing fancy, straightforward, but still like people are struggling, and we are struggling with we have UX team, we have developers, we have QAs, we have customer success, we have some we have a group with from community with whom we are showing the app, and still when we release to production, that people are really struggling with that, and it's just nature that they don't know, and eventually we had to put some now what we are doing for new functionality, we had to put some pop-ups explaining what you can actually do, because they just don't know that you can click on search on icon or whatever.
Yeah, I'm the other end of the spectrum doing a ERP that runs giant furniture manufacturing plants. You know, our UX is not our focus, but believe me, there's a lot of training involved. So.
Andre's hitting it.
We've seen, Andre, with our app and a similar user base is that they don't have the same expectations of software as like my generation does. Like I know what the save button looks like, and I know the magnifying glass to me means search. But when we're talking about the more senior community, they have different cultural touch points. And that has been something that's been really interesting for us, trying to figure out how do you indicate to someone who is of a different generation that doesn't have the same cultural touch points as you, what save is, what search is, like how do we train that into them?
Yeah, that is it. But we also they also have, believe me or not, they have also different generations. Let's say they have range from 60 to 90. And they also, some of them are really good in they are even helping and giving feedback, and they are very engaged with us. But the rest, some of them just don't give me that. I don't need that. You're just how do they say? You're just monitoring us. You know that you're looking. And we don't. Some of them just don't want to use any technology. Yeah, but you are right. We're gonna. Thank you, Jenny. That is good. A really good point.
We are getting close to time. I want to just blast through a couple of slides real quick, and then we can either chat a little bit more or we can go home to our families, whichever. Yeah. So I want to talk really just super quick about my principles of automation. I think we all have a code of ethics. We all have a code of behavior that is internal to ourselves, and we don't write it down. It's an implicit thing. And if we make it explicit, then we can start to say, these are the things that we value. These are the things we need. This is what I value in automation, or honestly in testing in general, but this is an automation talk. Test design emphasizes reliability, value, and speed. Collaboration determines what types of tests to write and run. Features must be written to be testable, either by automation or manually. Code reviews are for everyone. And automation code is production code. Stephen, I see you said you like that. Look up Paul Grafazzi. His Hunting for Sasquatch talk is where I literally stole that comment from. So Paul Grafazzi, Hunting for Sasquatch, automation code is production code. Skip that. When we're talking about can this be automated, we need to think about what are the inputs to the system? Like, what does it take in? I have a set of functionality in my app that time is an input. If the visit doesn't last at least 8 minutes, bad things happen on the back end that cause it to not be a visit anymore. I can't really have an 8-minute long UI test. So how do I fake that? Can that be automated? What variables act on the system? What data do we need to make this test good? And is it written in a testable way? If we answer yes to most or all of these questions, or they're all reasonable answers, then yeah, maybe it can be automated. Sometimes this is a guess. This is in every single presentation I have, I think is sometimes this is a guess. We also need to think about, does the UI change dramatically between runs? Are there elements that are hard to automate, like video or sound, or that kind of stuff? Like it's hard to say, I pressed a play button and sound happened in an automated way. Not impossible, but can we tell if it breaks? Like if we are trying to assert something, are we asserting something that says this is not working like we expected it to? Or is it something where we need to just use Apply tools and say, okay, it's a visual thing? And is it valuable? Is the piece of thing that we're trying to automate a valuable thing to automate that gives us information? I very strongly believe that automation does not find defects. It gives humans information. And we use that information to determine whether or not the system is behaving in an expected way. Should this feature be automated? And I'm sorry, I'm just like blasting through this, but I want to make sure I get to most of these points. So should this be automated is my favorite question, because the question comes to what's already automated. What's already there in a unit test? What's in an integration test? What's in an end-to-end test? Is this already covered in a way that is valuable? My favorite example here is unit tests should do all of your date time functions, because date time is, and computers are better at that than humans. So yes, I'll automate everything that should be automated. Maybe. I'm a solid maybe on that one. Is it a good candidate for automation? Is it something that is valuable to be automated? Does it give us valuable information back? Do we have time and resources? And honestly, sometimes the answer is no, we don't. But we can file this away and say, when we have time and resources, here is my justification for automating this, and here's how I would automate it. Which I think is more valuable than saying, oh, I don't have time, guess I'll just go run some more manual tests. If we've got the information that we need to know if we've got the information to say how we can automate this and what we need to automate it, write that down and you'll have half your work done when you come back to it. I have a very hilarious friend and I talk a lot about unit tests. We're not going to read this, but it's really funny. I'll share the slides. Yeah, risk of losing money if the situation occurs is a huge impact. That is a great point to think about when you think, should this be automated? What does automating this look like? When we're talking about actually doing the tippity taps and putting our hands on keyboard, what we need to think about is what elements do we need to interact with? What steps do a computer need to take beyond what a human necessarily does? What data does it need? What setup does it need? These are all things you can do without doing the tippity taps, without actually writing code. You can sit down and write pseudocode that says, here's the steps I need to take. Here's the flow I need to take. Here's my justification for doing this. And that is incredibly valuable when you go to actually do the automation. Even if you don't know how to code, if you don't have the time to code, if you don't have the resources to code, you can do this piece. Like you can write pseudocode. You can write a flow chart. You can write these steps down. And that is halfway to automation. And it starts to train your brain to think, what does automation first look like? What does it mean to do automation? And that's really important. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And do we need to wipe or reset data between test runs? My answer to that is always yes, because tests shouldn't be dependent on each other. But I recognize that's not reasonable for all situations. Also ask, what can automation do that humans can't do? Large data sets, randomization, doing it more than once. Is as soon as humans get bored, we start making mistakes.
What you wrote there, I had a few managers in the past do this, and then they come up to me, it's like, what do you think it would take to actually do this test, like in programming, like for automation? I was like, first of all, I was like so happy that they actually took the effort to even try to do something. And then, you know, it helps me actually give a realistic point of view of like, oh, it's like, okay, you have the data. So yeah, this approach, even as you said, if they didn't have any programming experience, just to be able to sit down and like do something like this is very beneficial.
Exactly. And this is a great exercise for juniors, because then you start thinking a little bit more automation first. It starts laying the groundwork for writing automation because it starts letting you step into that mindset. And that's really what I want this to be about, is stepping into that mindset even before you put hands on keyboard. Goodbye to the rest of this. Okay, bonus soft skill is to be lazy. Wait, no. Stop celebrating. Bonus soft skill is to not over automate. At one point, someone told me that I needed to prove I could do automation. So I wrote a test that verified that our password requirements worked. It was like 19 freaking tests that tested every combination of password requirements that we had. Because sometimes I automate with spite. That's a terrible test. Don't do that. The fewer tests we have, the faster it's going to run. And that's what we want. We want fast information. We want fast feedback. We don't need to know that every single password requirement is met. A unit test can do that in less than half the time, in like 2 seconds, where it's going to take my test a minute to run. Like, that's ridiculous. Let unit tests do that because that's what they're good at. So don't over automate. Automate what you need to automate. Think about it. Should it? Think about, can it? Think about, is it valuable? Because what you want from your test is you want to know what information it's going to return that you can't get another way, or that you can't get as quickly. And that was a dumb thing for me to do. Again, sometimes I automate out of spite. As this was a workshop, I've got a couple of next steps that I offered to people, that I suggested people to do. Set a goal to create automation ready implementations. And that looks like asking your developers, asking your product people, is this automatable? Do we have identifiers on these elements? Could I write automation on this if I had the time? Write pseudocode and have it reviewed. Just like Stephen was saying, anyone can do this. And you can ask anyone on your team to look through it and say, does this look right? Just like you would real code or a test case, or just like you would for your first draft of an English paper. Like, you can have someone read that and tell you if it makes sense. Earmark your test cases for automation. If you don't have time to actually do the tippity taps and make the code, you can always say, this is what needs to be done, and this is why. This is how. Start learning. Test Automation University is one of my favorite resources. Lots of different things. You can start learning, start getting more code aware. Pair with your developers. Hang out with them. They're cool dudes and ladies and others. They're great. And by pairing with them, you're going to learn how they think. You're going to learn what they think about. And that's really important. And then look at unit tests. Like, I'm going to say that 100 more times. Unit tests are incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And it's something that we as testers should add to our arsenals. Okay, that's what I've got. Here's another adorable picture of my cat. I'm going to stop sharing screen. And we are at 7:01. So if people need to bounce, you can absolutely bounce. If you want to keep chatting, I'm here for it.